prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View Radio on this January 8th, 2018 day. My name is Nick Pitts, and I am your host for Point of View. And I want you to know that today is going to be a packed show. You're going to be wanting to tune in because we have got so much going on today, because there's so much news that not only happened this morning, but it also happened over the weekend as well. And please know that we've got a packed show with everything from Donald Trump and the Tell-All book with Michael Wolff that came out on Friday, even though it was scheduled to come out on Tuesday. But because of a cease and desist letter and other pressures from the administration, the publisher went ahead and released that on Friday. So we're going to be overviewing this book. Is there truth in this and some of the scandalous claims that Michael Wolff has kind of documented through his over 200 interviews in the White House? Or is this just fiction and Wolff, again, just kind of putting his own perception of reality upon the White House and the Trump presidency? We're going to be talking about that and how Steve Bannon apologized even yesterday to President Trump and his son for some of the comments that he made in the book. And then we're going to swing over and talk about millennials, because, of course, being the millennial host here on Point of View, we've got to talk about we selfie-taking, Uber-riding, student debt accumulating millennials. And we'll be talking about the idea of perfectionism. And there was a recent study that was put out that showed that millennials suffer from perfectionism to a greater extent than any other generation since the 60s, and when it was first started being documented, and kind of some of the negative ripple effects. Now, obviously, from the Christian perspective, we have to understand, is this perfectionism a good thing? Because after all, when we think about what our Lord said in Matthew 5:48, he calls us to be perfect, for he is perfect. But is there a difference to be made between perfectionism and excellence? And we'll be kind of discussing and teasing that out a little later on during the hour. And then coming up in the last part of our show, in the second hour, we've got a great interview where we're going to be talking with the leaders of the Park Cities Preston Hollow Leadership Forum. And it was just put out over the weekend, or actually last week, a story that tried to show, is this leadership forum really trying to move the city of Dallas, our state, as well as our country to the right? We'll find out when we've got both leaders of the organization on in the second hour. But as always, we're going to be taking your phone calls as well as your comments on Facebook as well. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. But we're also going to be taking your questions and comments on Facebook as well, on facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We're going to be sharing some of your Facebook comments as well as any questions that you might have as we kind of make our way through the show. But without further ado, let's jump into it, shall we? Over the weekend, specifically yesterday, President Trump's top chief strategist, his former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, issued an apology, which was unlike anything that he's ever done before. According to the Washington Post, President Trump's former chief strategist offered a semi-apology Sunday after days of withering castigation from the White House over his scathing comments in a new book praising Trump in a public statement that aimed to soften some of his earlier criticism. This book, it was Michael Wolff's book called Fire and Fury, that what we mentioned was released on Friday instead of on Tuesday because of the cease and desist letter that came through. Steve Bannon's mea culpa came as Trump and his senior aides continued to barrage a level of public insults against him, with even President Trump putting a characteristic detail onto Bannon's name, calling him Sloppy Steve. The president's top policy advisor, Stephen Miller, on Sunday called on Bannon as an angry and vindictive person whose grotesque comments are so out of touch with reality. What's fascinating is that Bannon was really a large source of material for Michael Wolff's book that has just been rocking the media world and rocking our world as we continue to hear more and more of these comments inside of the administration. But what was fascinating is that President Trump went ahead and responded to some of these criticisms, because a large part of those criticisms were really calling into question his capacities as well as his fitness for the office of president. And so he, on Saturday, began to send out a series of tweets. And in those series of tweets, began to think through and begin to kind of justify himself, saying that he's very smart, he's very capable, he's a self-made billionaire that was able to take a little bit from what his father Fred gave him and really turned it into much. And then not only that, but also has shown himself as not only succeeding in the business world, but also in the political world as well, being an individual that took out the Clinton machine, is what he called it. And then even further than that was an individual that was elected his first time as president of the United States. But then not only was President Trump willing to defend himself, but we also saw that he was sending out his aides as well. Specifically, one of those aides was Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller went on CNN's State of the Union, hosted by Jake Tapper, and began to defend the president. But what was really fascinating is what some of the comments and how that interview ended. And we've got an excerpt of that interview now we'll play for you.
Quote, actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. Crooked Hillary Clinton also played these cards very hard and, as everyone knows, went down in flames. I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to president of the United States on my first try. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that. Do you think tweets like that help or hurt the cause that the president is stable and up for the job?
Not only do I think they help it, but I think in the toxic environment that you've created here in CNN and cable news, which is a real crisis of legitimacy for your network, and we saw it, of course, with the extremely fake news you reported about the Don Jr. and WikiLeaks story. There was a huge embarrassment for your network.
Stephen.
Just like the huge embarrassment you had when you got the Comey testimony wrong.
Stephen, I'm trying to get to the issue of the president's fitness, which a lot of people are questioning.
I'm getting to the issue of your fitness, but the president's tweets absolutely reaffirmed the plain-spoken truth. A self-made billionaire revolutionized reality TV and tapped into something magical that's happening in the hearts of this country. The people that you don't...
The president has an approval rating in the 30s. I don't know what magical you're talking about.
The people that you don't connect with and understand, the people whose manufacturing jobs have left, who've been besieged by high-crime communities, and who've been affected by a policy of uncontrolled immigration, those voices, those experiences don't get covered on this network. That's why, to prove the point, I was booked to talk about the very issues I'm just describing, and you're not even asking about them because they're not interesting facts to you.
That's not true. I have plenty of questions on immigration. You've attempted to filibuster by talking about your flights.
No, I'm not.
I want to ask you a question because
don't be condescending, Jake.
Stephen, the president and the White House.
The reason why I want to talk about
the president and the White House.
The reason why I want to talk about the president's experiences, what I've seen with him traveling to meet dozens of foreign leaders, with his incredible work.
Okay, you're not answering the questions.
No,
I understand.
You have 24 hours a day of anti-Trump material. You're not going to give 3 minutes for the American people to hear the real experience of Donald Trump.
There's one viewer that you care about right now, and you're being obsequious. You're being a factotum in order to please him. Okay.
No.
And I think I've wasted enough of my viewers' time. Thank you, Stephen. As Republicans, lawmakers call for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to resign in a major reversal, Democrats.
Tell me how you really feel, Jake Tapper. but it was really fascinating because, again, Tapper acknowledged the fact that maybe is it possible that Stephen Miller came onto the show because he's really playing for an audience of one. Well, within 30 minutes, President Trump sent out this tweet. Jake Tapper of fake news CNN just got destroyed in his interview with Stephen Miller of the Trump administration. Watch the hatred and unfairness of this CNN flunky. Well, you've heard it here, and we'd love to hear from you. We're going to dissect a little bit more of that, as well as kind of some of the bigger picture of what's happening here in the United States, as well specifically what's centered around Washington. But again, know that we're going to be taking your phone calls as well as taking some of your Facebook comments. So be sure to call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, and also on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, the World Health Organization has just added an unusual disorder to its list of mental health conditions. People who play an excessive amount of video games could be diagnosed with a gaming disorder. Of course, they aren't saying that anyone who lives to play video games has this mental disorder, but they do set out some criteria to identify people with a gaming disorder. First, they show impaired control over gaming. This includes such things as frequency, intensity, and duration. Second, a person with this disorder shows an increasing priority to gaming to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests and daily activities. Third, there usually is a continuation or even an escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. You know, video gaming is no longer just for the young. It has become increasingly popular with people of all ages. The Entertainment Software Association estimates that more than 150 million Americans play video games. So it's not surprising that psychologists have been able to document video game addiction. It turns out that the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders defined Internet gaming disorder as a condition for further study. It also said the disorder was most common among male adolescents, but we're seeing problems surfacing in every age group. Video games can be a safe way of improving hand-eye coordination, enhancing problem-solving abilities, and relieving stress. But the concerns about addiction and gaming disorder should concern youth and adults. Video games can be addicting and apparently take over the lives of many who find them too enticing to moderate. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on this January 8th, 2018 day. My name is Nick Pitts, and I'm your host for Point of View. And we've been talking about during the first segment the scathing book that came out, the tell-all, that's known as Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury. If you'll remember closely, that book was conducted and kind of put together after a series of 200 interviews were put out. In those 200 interviews, that Michael Wolff had this significant access to the extent that he was saying that he was sitting in the White House, specifically in the West Wing on couches, and was just able to overhear conversations as well as to be able to kind of get in on interviews that were off the record, on the record, and on background, and really put out this just book that has catapulted. As soon as some of these excerpts were being leaked, it went from 25,000 on the Amazon ranking list to up to number 1. Now it's one of the best sellers on Amazon, standing on this Monday morning, even after it was pre-released on Friday. And really, there's a couple of components that are making their way into here. Can we trust the contents of this book? There are some that are going to say, well, he conducted over 200 interviews. These are kind of confirming some of the preconceived notions that many people think about the Trump administration. This is substantiating some of those biases and some of those ways that individuals are thinking. But then there are others that are calling into question some of Wolff's reporting that he did during the book. Specifically, there are instances whereby apparently conversations that he was able to record and document within the book relative to his talks that he had with President Trump, and President Trump not knowing who John Boehner is, even though there are various other instances in the past where not only was Trump aware of former Speaker Boehner, but he was very cognizant of the positions that Boehner took. And there are a couple of other instances that make us question whether this book is legitimate. Not only are there legitimacy questions surrounding the contents of the book, but then if you look at the historical career of Michael Wolff as well. Michael Wolff has been known, based upon some of his previous research, to not let the facts get in the way of his opinions, I guess would be one way to put it, where he was really, there's just been some ways in which he's just kind of skirted some of the details in order to be able to kind of push his narrative. So many are questioning kind of the contents of this book, but what we can't question is that it's making ripple effects. And what we would love to hear is to hear from you. Have you heard anything about this book? Maybe you've read this book. Maybe you have some understanding, or maybe you have an impression of this book that you'd like to share. We'd love to hear that from you. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we'll also be taking some of your comments and questions on Facebook as well. Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Be sure to head over there and leave a comment or question, or maybe just a like. And unfortunately, you're going to have to see my face when you go to Facebook.com. So I apologize for that, but you'll be able to hear your voice as well. So nevertheless, in response, kind of the general premise of this book is twofold. What we're continuing to see is with this access, what Wolff does is he characterizes the Trump administration and some of the inner workings of the West Wing as chaotic at kind of at worst, and really just disorganized. But he's also questioning the competency and the character of President Trump. And in response, what's happened is President Trump on Saturday morning sent out a series of tweets that tried to rectify that record. He tried to assert himself as not being an individual that you have to question, not being an individual that is unstable, but is very stable. So to quote exactly what President Trump tweeted on Saturday morning, he said, quote, "Actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. Crooked Hillary also played these cards very hard and, as everyone knows, went down in flames. I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to the President of the United States on my first try. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that." There are individuals that are taking this and kind of poking fun at it. But what we're continuing to see is that President Trump is speaking up for himself. That where this is already very difficult work to be president of the United States. And again, he's trying to have to double down and assert himself, not only to push his agenda, but now he's feeling as though he has to push his character. And I guess for many of us, this should be very reminiscent of our own lives as well. If we look back in the biblical narrative, it's very clear that discouragement is something that the enemy has been being used since the beginning of time. Specifically, when I was thinking about it this morning, I couldn't help but think about the Sanballats and Tobias of the world, right? When we think about the work of Nehemiah in building the wall, that's a significant work that he's already been put towards and kind of commissioned in. And then you have the Sanballats and Tobias that show up in Nehemiah 2 and really begin to work their forces in Nehemiah 4 to really discourage the already hard work. I think we all at some point in our lives needed someone to speak up for us. After all, sticks and stones break bones and words do crush spirits. However, for the Christian, we can take heart in verses like Romans 8:26, where not only do we have the capacity to understand that we have the Spirit of God living inside of us, and greater is He who is in us than he who is in the world, but we also know that Spirit, it says in Romans 8:26, knows us better than we know ourselves and groans on our behalf to the kingdom, up to the throne room. And not only is it groaning exactly what we need, perhaps during those times when we don't know what we need, it's finding itself as those groanings are going up to the throne room, they're also going to our God who's in heaven. And our God who's in heaven, it says in Hebrews 7, has Jesus, the Son of God, seated at the right hand of the Father, interceding on our behalf. And we know that our God, our Father, from everything from Psalm 84 to Psalm 69, He always gives good gifts to His children that He loves. That the righteous will not be withheld of any good thing. So even though discouraging work tries to question our capacities, divine love quiets our insecurities. And what we're continuing to see within this Trump presidency is there is much discouragement. Kind of in the excerpt that we heard, it's just very fascinating to hear this distrust that's happening and kind of the animosity that's bubbling up whenever the Trump administration tries to speak up for itself in the midst of some of these difficulties or in these pushes. What we saw illuminated in that interview specifically is just the vitriol and the aggressiveness, not only of the CNNs and not only of the media of the world trying to question the Trump presidency, but also the administration's aggressiveness and some of the heatedness that's coming from them as they try to speak up for the character and some of the work that they're doing. But what we're continuing to see is that this is illuminating a distrust that's becoming increasingly pervasive across the culture. There was a study that was put out over in Gallup magazine, and Gallup rather, and what it found is that 90% of self-identified Republicans said that they do not trust what's put on CNN, but 90% trust what comes out of the president's mouth. Well, you flip that over to self-identified Democrats, and self-identified Democrats in this poll, 88% do not trust what comes out of the president's mouth, but they trust what comes out of CNN. What we're continuing to see is that we no longer have shared facts anymore in the U.S. There's such a distrustfulness that's increasingly characterizing the human spirit here in the U.S. to where we can't even have conversations anymore because we can't even start on a level playing ground. We can't even agree about what are the ground rules to engage in a conversation. And so with that distrust, you start to see this aggressiveness. And I'm reminded of what Desmond Tutu would often say: don't increase your voice, but better your argument. Well, it's hard to have an argument. It's hard to have a discussion with individuals when we can't even agree on what is up and what is down. And so we would love to continue that discussion with you. Do you have a point of view? Do you have a question about the administration? Or perhaps that you have a point that you'd like to make? We would love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go onto the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, to maybe share your comment or question. Do you think there's legitimacy to the Wolf Book? Perhaps you have your doubts about the Wolf Book, and there's more to it than what's being said. We would love to hear from you on that as well. You know, it's been very fascinating to see how this is kind of moving. This narrative is moving here in the U.S. What's so fascinating is that we're continuing to see that really some of these books and some of these negative portrayals of our president are being very quickly believed by some. But for others, there's just an immediate click off. There's just an immediacy whereby anything negative that happens or anything negative that's put out by the media is immediately disqualified and not trusted. What we're continuing to see undergirding a lot of this is the confirmation bias, that many of us aren't necessarily going into the news in order to be armed with information, but we're going into the news and reading the news to such an extent that we're wanting edified our preconceived notions of what it is. Well, one of the beautiful things about America is we have this thing called free speech, the First Amendment. In the First Amendment, our forefounders believed it to be true that the free exchange of information allowed us to be able to say, well, I changed my mind. Well, I'm willing to engage in this conversation, which should very much echo within the biblical narrative for those who have ears to hear, because this is what our God has done in Isaiah 1:18. He says, come and let us reason together. Let's exchange dialogue, and we might not agree with one another, but as Alexa de Tocqueville said, we can disagree with one another, but we're all moving towards the same betterment of our country as well. And as we continue forward, we're going to continue to talk about this as well as more and other stories. We'll be back, though, right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm your host for Point of View on this Monday, January 8th, where we're all trying to figure out, is Oprah going to run for president? No, I'm just kidding, but not really, because over the Golden Globes over the weekend, yesterday she won the Camilla Award, the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Golden Globes, and many are talking about some of her speech that she gave about painting a better picture of tomorrow, specifically empowering women and specifically women of color to be able to move forward in such a way that they might be able to take leadership. But while many are talking about a potential Oprah run in 2020, many are thinking about what's happened in 2017 within the Trump administration and his work and kind of what's been documented now in the book that we've been talking about Michael Wolff. I've read significant portions of the book, haven't finished the book, read significant portions of the book. And so I thought we'd give some time during this segment to be able to better understand why is it that Steve Bannon apologized? What were some of those juicy claims that apparently have are causing much consternation and controversy within Washington? So again, just to catch you up, Michael Wolff had really unprecedented access to the West Wing during the first year of the Trump administration, that he gained over conducted more than 200 interviews on top-level officials relative in the administration. And what he came out with this book, Fire and Fury, that was released on Friday. Now, if you're a reader of the Daily Briefing, which I highly encourage you to do, you can go over to thebriefing.net and subscribe to that. You'll notice that I documented that it was scheduled for release on Tuesday. Well, it was scheduled for release on Tuesday, but on that Wednesday, 6 days prior, President Trump issued a cease and desist letter. His lawyers said, you need to stop with this. And so with the idea of the pressure mounting, as well as the controversy reaching a new level, the publishers decided to go ahead and to release this book early. And they went ahead and released it on Friday. So it left for some great evening reading, one might say, over the weekend. And so in this bombshell book that, again, was officially set to hit shelves but was released earlier on that Friday, there were some pretty significant comments that were on the record, as well as observations from Wolff. And so I thought we'd kind of overview some of those. Specifically, there was one which really, according to Wolff, Trump didn't expect to win the presidency. To quote Wolff, Trump's, quote, ultimate goal had never been to win the Oval Office. He was excited about the exposure and the opportunities to develop his brand. Wolff goes so far as even to say that with the encouragement from his longtime friend and former Fox News leader, Roger Ailes, Trump even flirted with the idea of starting his own television network. And so what Wolff is asserting is that this was really just a movement in order to be able to gain more exposure, to yield that exposure, to create a national TV network that didn't end up happening because President Trump won the presidency. And so we continue to see, here's another kind of pretty significant comment from the Wolff book. He says, once he lost, Trump would be both insanely famous and a martyr to crooked Hillary. So he thought that this was going to be an ability for him to position himself well to become the cable news star, along with advisor Kellyanne Conway. But all of that didn't necessarily pan out because, again, the unexpected happened when Trump won the presidency. Moving on, when we moved to the inauguration, what was, again, just a very, very, very distinct take from Wolff. He says, quote, Trump did not enjoy his own inauguration. He was angry that A-level stars had snubbed the event, disgruntled with the accommodations at the Blair House and visibly fighting with his wife, who seemed to be on the verge of tears. Now, again, I have to continue to remind us that these are pretty scandalous claims. These are pretty bold, audacious claims that Wolff is offering up. But again, I would caution us, especially for those of us that have ears to hear, according to Matthew 10:16, to be innocent as doves and shrewd as serpents, to recognize Wolff's character and Wolff's historical record in the past has been one that he tends to exaggerate claims in order to make a more flamboyant point. But moving on to probably one of the more significant points is really what many individuals are saying. This is really just Bannon's tell-all that he's using Wolff during this. Bannon, who is the chief strategist and really what some consider a very key and influential figure in the Trump campaign, really did. He very much came onto the record at times, and what many would say provided off-the-record commentary that really filled the pages of Wolf's book. Steve Bannon described a controversial meeting between Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort and a Russian lawyer as, quote, treasonous and, quote, unpatriotic, according to Wolf. And the former Breitbart head, Bannon, also told Wolf he expected the investigators in the Russian probe to, quote, crack Don Jr. like an egg on national TV. Bannon believed that Don Jr. had taken the Russian lawyer who was peddling dirt on Hillary Clinton up to the 26th floor to meet President or then candidate Trump, who would become President Trump. Now, these are pretty salacious claims, especially if you've paid attention to the past, whereby President Trump is very keen and very protective of his children. And for the idea of Bannon to know this and then to go after President Trump's children is just very interesting take. Well, that interesting take has turned into a very significant apology. And so over on Sunday morning, Mike Allen of Axios released had an exclusive whereby Bannon released an apology to President Trump. And here are some quotes from the Bannon apology. He says, Donald Trump Jr. is both a patriot and a good man. He's been relentless in his advocacy for his father and the agenda that's helped turn our country around. My support is also unwavering for the president and his agenda, as I've shown in my national radio broadcasts on the pages of Breitbart News and in speeches and appearances from Tokyo to Hong Kong to Arizona to Alabama. President Trump was the only candidate that could have taken on and defended the Clinton apparatus, and I'm the only person to date to conduct a global effort to preach the message of Trump and Trumpism and remain ready to stand in the breach for the president's efforts to make America great again. To end it, he says, quote, I regret my delay in responding to the inaccurate reporting regarding Don Jr. has diverted attention from the president's historical accomplishments in the first year of his presidency. What's fascinating about this is news broke over the weekend that apparently orders from on high were to, quote, bury Steve, or as President Trump has now affectionately referred to him as Sloppy Steve. What's fascinating about this is we're continuing to see the conflict that's kind of brewing within the White House because of this book. But for those of us that are wondering why are we having to pay attention to this, it's very frustrating because again we're giving over to the idea of personality and we're wondering where's the policy moving forward. There's significant policy, there's significant legislation that needs to be moved, especially during this time right now. I don't know about you, but I've been thinking about what is to come of these dreamers, because I know that, again, we're moving in such a way that we're coming up to that deadline where these individuals, these children that were born into the U.S. now are going to have are really having to force whether they're going to have to double down or they're going to go into hiding when this DREAM Act kind of expires, or are elected officials going to be able to do the necessary work to pass a compromising solution that really allows the flourishment of the U.S. relative to the DREAM Act? What's happening because of that? Or if you're paying attention to the stopgap measures right now, instead of funding the government for an entire year, we continue to fund the government for 10 days, for 12 days, for 2 months. And any businessman would know that's really not a way to operate at an efficient level if you're only looking forward to 2 weeks down the road, 2 months down the road. You need at least a year because, I think about one particular example. Think about it from our military standpoint. Military individuals have not had the ability to have a full year's worth of funding to understand and to prepare and to budget for the funding necessary to create the renovations for what's happening on bases here in the U.S. And without that full year, they can't do those necessary renovations because the first priority has to be the troops that are on the ground at the very forefront of the battles, and not necessarily for the troops that are back here in the U.S. that now are living in what many would consider antiquated and in necessary need of renovations and updates right now, because again, Congress hasn't been able to pass a full year. And so but we're talking about personality and we're not talking about policy. Or we talk about S-CHIP and some of the children's health care relative to the insurance. There is many policies, there's many legislative needs right now that need to be addressed, that need to be talked about, that need the American public to put pressure on their elected officials to be able to do the work that they said to do. But right now we're talking about a Wolf book. It just seems it's very frustrating for many of us, I would contend. And it requires us to be able to do the necessary work to not give attention to those things that are just diverting to the eye, but to continue to double down and press our elected officials to do the necessary work that we called them to do, which is to create rules of law in order that the society would flourish and the economy would stabilize as well. We'd love to hear from you. And so what are some of your comments? What are you thinking about the Wolf Book? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can log on to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and you can share your comment or your question on the Facebook page. But again, I apologize because you're going to have to see my face when you look at that Facebook page, and that's never a good thing, especially this early in the morning. We would love to hear from you. But when we come back after the break, we're going to continue talking about some of the things that are happening out of the White House. But more than that, we're going to talk about perfectionism, especially among millennials, and how perfectionism has reached a new high unlike any other historical point. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ben Franklin reportedly said, "There is nothing certain in life except for death and taxes." Well, in a 548-page complaint, one man has targeted at least one of those certainties, and it's not death. Terry Lee Hines contends that the United States tax code has violated the Constitution by establishing taxism and institutionalized faith and religion. Because the tax code has the effect of favoring and even promoting organized religions through tax breaks and other benefits, Mr. Hines believes the tax code is in violation of the First Amendment. Well, I suppose this is the sort of case that law students are forced to grapple with, but actually have little effect in the real world. Some may dream that such a lawsuit is the silver bullet to bring down our ghoulish tax system. Alas, Mr. Hines' lawsuit will not free us from the taxman's visit every April 15. For one reason, taxpayers have a lot of hurdles to overcome just to bring the lawsuit. Mere allegations, even ones dressed up in the garb of a First Amendment challenge, that they do not like to pay taxes will not be sufficient. For now, Mr. Hines and the rest of us will have to continue to pay our taxes, and most importantly, the religious charities and houses of worship that are exempt from them will continue to be exempt. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on this January 8th, 2018 day. And for those of you that are kind of a celebratory people, those that are always looking for what day it is, I can't help. I must tell you, if you sign up to the daily briefing, you would know that today is National Bubble Bath Day. I'm not quite sure what that has to do with anything, but apparently the soap company has taken over this day. And so if you were having a day of Monday, if you're having a case of the Mondays, please know that you can celebrate National Bubble Bath Day at the end of the day. I would highly discourage taking a bubble bath at work, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, celebrate National Bubble Bath Day after a very hard day of work. And so we're going to continue on, and we're not going to talk anymore about the White House. Let's talk about millennials, because after all, Travis Tritt sung it, and I believe it. One day, I'm going to be somebody. Millennials are their harshest critics, yet their biggest fans, according to this new study that was put out of the Psychological Bulletin. This study was published and indicated that perfectionism among young people significantly increased since the 1980s. According to this study, the drive to be perfect in body, mind, and career among today's college students has significantly increased compared with prior generations, which may be taking a toll on young people's mental health, according to the APA. They measured 3 types of perfectionism: self-oriented, an irrational desire to be perfect, socially prescribed or perceiving excessive expectations from others, and other-oriented, placing unrealistic standards on themselves. And here were some of the fascinating takes. That was the numbers, because I'm more of a numbers guy. The study published in the Psychological Bulletin found that more recent generations of college students reported significantly higher scores for each form of perfectionism than earlier generations. Specifically, between 1989 and 2016, the self-oriented perfectionism score increased by 10%. Socially prescribed increased by 33%, and other-oriented increased by 16%. What we're continuing to see within millennials is just this increased desire to want to be to pursue after perfection, right? What we've always known to be true is that many of this can happen because what's kind of been characterized as we're seen as almost like a narcissistic generation. Time magazine had their famous cover that indicated that we're generation me, me, me. But I would submit to you that this is an incomplete understanding of the millennial profile. We believe in ourselves and pay attention to our desires because we overwhelmingly believe that we can change the world for the better. According to the book out by the Rainers called The Millennial Generation, the Rainers, their studies indicated that upwards of 90% of millennials believe they have the capacities and wherewithal necessary to change the world. There's this extent that we've always grown up with a world on fire. Let's think about the various sectors of society, shall we? And there's always been those breakdowns that we've been keenly aware of because we've always grown up in an information age. Think about it from the church standpoint, and all we've known is the Catholic Church scandal. Think about it from the business standpoint, and we grew up in the wake of the Enron scandal. Think about it from the government standpoint, and we've always known government officials not necessarily to be galvanized over, such as in previous generations relative to JFK, but we've always known the David Vitters and some of those controversies, and the Denny Hasserts of the world. We've always seen those controversies play out before us. And there are and we've always known within the family sphere as well, with the rise of divorce, unfaithfulness, infidelity has always been on the uptick as well. We've grown up seeing there are great needs and seeing there are great wrongs that are being perpetuated. So, of course, there's this generality and there's this impetus inside of us that wants to bring about change. And so because of that, we tend to think about ourselves more and think about our capacities, to know thyself, according to the Oracle, the Greek historian. But there's also this sense that because we're paying so much attention to ourselves, that it's creating these unnecessary levels of expectations that are resulting in just high levels of stress and this sense of perfectionism that's plaguing us. But from a Christian perspective, what are we to think about this? As I quoted at the top of the hour, what we see in Matthew, specifically what Jesus says in Matthew 5:48, we are to be perfect for our Heavenly Father is perfect. This striving towards perfectionism appears to be something that's biblical in nature, right? Well, I would submit that there needs to be a delineation between perfectionism and excellence. You see, perfectionism typically tends to hone in on the individual and not necessarily on the product they're doing. Perfectionism says, look at me, whereas excellence says, look at what I've done. Perfectionism tends to create this self-glory, whereas excellence tends to say, look at the glory that I was able to create. You see, the end goals are radically different. Perfectionism wants you to look at what I've done, but rather excellence says, look at the work that's contributing to society. In the biblical narrative, I think we're continuing to see a case made for moving towards excellence, moving to do things in an excellent manner. We see this all throughout the biblical narrative. We think about it from a 1 Corinthians 10:31 standpoint. Whatever you do, whatever you eat or drink, you do for the glory of God. You think about it from Colossians 3:23, where Paul is going to tell the church at Colossae to work not to man, but rather to God. We think about Brother Lawrence and his practicing the presence of God said that we should do all our work as if it was before the very face of God, to strive after excellence in everything that we do, because of what Jesus said in Matthew 25, whatever you do for the least of these, whatever you do for me. And to recognize that in doing so, you may be entertaining angels, is what the writer of Hebrews would say. We're seeing that everything is sacred in what we do. There's no sacred and secular divide between our excellence can only be done within the four walls of the church, but rather our excellence is to be had as a whole encompassing manner of life. Because after all, as the 19th century theologian, political statesman Abraham Kuyper said, he says that there is not one square inch over the whole humane of human existence over which God does not say mine. God has made it explicitly clear that whatever your vocation, inside or outside the church, it's to be done for the glory of his name. And that's not necessarily speaking up the gospel every time you get the chance, that there's a more robustness, there's a more richness to exercising this kingdom ethic that's more than simply just words proclaiming that Jesus is king and that Jesus died and resurrected on the third day. You see, exercising a kingdom ethic, moving towards creating a better world, is understanding that he has gifted me a certain way, and I need to invest those talents and skills in such a way that extend his kingdom with integrity, with truth, with honesty, with a sense of passion, and seeing that even in those good works, we're continuing to see those good works point to our Heavenly Father who's in heaven. We'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on perfectionism and excellence? What are your thoughts on the increased kind of stress that's finding themselves among millennials, this generation, me? We'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be sharing your comments and questions on air. But we've been talking about this idea of perfectionism, and one can't help but escape from the fact that, especially if we're looking at it from the 80s to today, what we're continuing to see is that there is a little thing that's causing us to be more self-reflective from the 80s, and that would be social media. What's fascinating is there was a study that was actually put out that I highlighted in the daily briefing today that indicated that individuals are spending upwards of 2 hours every day now on social media. That seems very outlandish to me, but until I realized that this Facebook profile is up for the entirety of the show, which is 2 hours. So I guess I'm going to check off all my social media usage by the morning. But nevertheless, there's this social media often is a mirror that looks right back at us, and it doesn't allow us to look into the world, but it does provide that opportunity as well. So we'll be talking about that. You can access that fascinating study on our website at pointofview.net, where you can click over on See More, which is on the first part of the page, and see kind of more about what's happening. But when we get back on the second hour, we're going to be taking a shift, and we're going to introduce two guests to you and some of the significant work that they're doing here in their local community, specifically the Dallas community, in order to make it better. And I hope you'll join us after the break.
What difference does it make when you support Point of View? For Lee Weaver and his family, it meant doing something to reach out to women in need, and so far, to help bring nearly 5,000 babies into the world.
As a family, we were sitting around the dinner table. Our older daughter said, "Dad, we need to do something about it." And that kind of struck a chord in our family. All of that started out of Point of View and the effect it had on our conversations and our heart, leading us into don't be hearers only, but doers of the word. Point of View has always been real supporters of the concept that we're a small part of.
Your support of Point of View inspires people to do great things. You partner in spreading truth around the world. But the only way to make that happen is for you to make the call or visit us online and join the Truth Team. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Do it now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back on Point of View on this January 8th, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts, and thank you so much for joining us in the second hour. But we have got a special surprise for you. We have got two guests in studio today that are really going to help us better understand specifically what's happening here in the Dallas area. Not only identification of wrongs, but what I so enjoy about what these individuals are doing is how can we make things right? Because I think we're living and moving in a world in which it's really easy for us to be able to see what's necessarily wrong and pervasive in our culture. But what can we do to make things right? Because I think that's the beauty of what's happened here in this American experiment, that we've been given the freedom of speech and freedom of assembly to be able to identify, yes, but then also to be a part of the solution. To what Edmund Burke would say, one of the foremost thinkers of conservatism, to ride into our little platoons in order that we might make this country all the more better. And so we're going to be taking comments and questions today and having a great discussion with Beth Biesel, as well as with David Carruth as well, who we've got in studio. So glad that you guys decided to join us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, so good. So good to have you all here. And so Beth and David are the leadership of the Park Cities Preston Hollow Leadership Forum. And what they're trying to do, it's a fascinating forum that we're going to talk more about what they're doing and more specifically about what this leadership forum is doing later on. But really, Beth, we'll start off with you. It seems like this leadership forum is really a heart for Dallas, for Texas, for the country as well. Are you originally from the Dallas area? Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Actually, I'm not originally from Dallas, but I got here as fast as I could.
Hey, okay. Same here.
I'm from North Carolina, and I'm married into the Dallas community.
That's phenomenal. Where in North Carolina?
A little town called Farmville, North Carolina.
Okay.
And its population has 5,000 people, so it's probably never been heard of before.
I love that. Okay, I'm originally from Tennessee. And so whenever I introduce myself to Texans, I always have to tell them, you're welcome for Davy Crockett. And thank you so much for the Houston Oilers. And so we're finally seeing a return on that investment when we got the surprise victory against the Kansas City Chiefs this weekend. But nevertheless,
congratulations.
enough about me. Beth, so what got you interested in the political world? What was it that really spurred it on?
It all started when I was homeschooling my children, and we were studying U.S. government and U.S. Constitution, and I was flabbergasted at the difference between what I was reading in the historical events and what was taking place in America at the time. It was around 2008, 2009. And the difference was stunning. And I said to my kids, we need to do something about this. And there was this Tea Party event, and we went sort of on a field trip experience and listened to what other people were saying. And we found out there were, at the time, maybe 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 people who also felt like we felt. There were a lot of wrongs. Our Constitution was being violated. Government had expanded way beyond its original limited powers. There was no separation. Things were way out of control, and I just felt pulled into this. And I also felt like the Lord just opened up the door for me to get into this. A novice, uneducated, but sought to learn and see what the Lord might have for me to do.
That's phenomenal. And so, David, you're from the Dallas area, correct?
I am. That's correct.
And so you've been here in the Dallas area. What was it that really spurred your cause towards wanting to get politically motivated?
Well, I've always been interested in politics, but I had to sort of take a hiatus from it during my career, the heart of my career. But actually, it was and it was a Tea Party rally that Beth was talking about, that's really what kind of reactivated me. And that was in 2009 in front of the City Hall. As Beth said, had several thousand people. And it was just, it just opened your eyes to how off track things had gotten and how something had to be done to improve it. So I reactivated that point and have been active ever since.
That's phenomenal. And so Beth comes from an educational background. You were speaking towards your vocation that really caused you to take that break from politics. What was that?
I've been a real estate developer virtually all my life, and still am. I mean, I'm not retired, but I'm not quite as active as I was back then.
I think that's one of the rich things that America offers us is the opportunity not necessarily to be career politicians, but to function in various sectors of society to be able to better understand these are the rules and the laws of the land. How can we that are actually kind of receiving some of those and having to abide by those, how can we offer up our voices in order to make it a little bit more better? And you both have talked about what's happened in 2008, 2009 at that Tea Party rally. So was that really kind of the genesis of this leadership forum, Beth?
That was the genesis, and David has a little bit more of the detail, but Russ Ramsland and David were there. Maybe it would be better for him to tell the story because they started it.
Well, we were both there, Russ and I. Russ is a Dallas businessman and a political activist. Hope he doesn't mind me calling him that. And we both went to that rally just kind of on a whim. And Russ really caught the vision strongly, and formed what at that time was a Tea Party organization. It was actually Tea Party was in the name. That's since been taken out because the press has sort of painted Tea Party people as being right wing extremists, and they're not that. But Russ started this in an abandoned mattress store, and at the first meeting he had 3 people. He loves to tell this. And at the second meeting he had 3 people. At the third meeting he had 4 people, so it was growing. At the fourth meeting he had 3 people again. So, but it's grown to the point where there are about 1,200 people on our rolls, and that only means that we have their email addresses and send them notices. We don't have members. Anybody's welcome to come. We don't charge anything there's no fee to attend. The room we meet in, which is the University Park Library, usually, has a capacity of 120 people, and we often have a standing room only. So that's what it's grown into over a period of time.
That's phenomenal. So what takes place, Beth, at some of these meetings?
Well, we start out, first of all, with the pledges and prayer. And we think that is so important just to root and ground the beginning of the meeting and set the tone. But it's an educational forum. So we invite speakers. Sometimes one speaker will take up the whole meeting. Sometimes we'll have multiple speakers. But it's to educate people on the current issues of the day. Sometimes we bring in someone to talk about historical events that have influenced our country and brought us to the place of being the greatest country in the whole world. Wow. And then we'll talk about in the meeting what you can do. Wow. That's the big question. If this is wrong and this is what is the right thing, then how do we get there? What are the action items? What are the things that can be done?
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. So we're going to have to come up on a break, but thankfully they're going to be back after the break. And so we're going to also open up the phone calls as well as the Facebook page. You can call and leave in a message, or you can put a message on the Facebook post. You can go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that is facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Or you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, and we'll be taking your calls as we get back from the break. And so when we get back from the break, I'm really going to be interested to hear, Beth and David, what are some of the things that are talked about? What are those issues that you're organizing around? And what are some of those action steps for our listeners to be able to do that maybe they can't make the meeting? What can they be doing out because of the meeting? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, the World Health Organization has just added an unusual disorder to its list of mental health conditions. People who play an excessive amount of video games could be diagnosed with a gaming disorder. Of course, they aren't saying that anyone who lives to play video games has this mental disorder, but they do set out some criteria to identify people with a gaming disorder. First, they show impaired control over gaming. This includes such things as frequency, intensity, and duration. Second, a person with this disorder shows an increasing priority to gaming to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other life interests and daily activities. Third, there usually is a continuation or even an escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. You know, video gaming is no longer just for the young. It has become increasingly popular with people of all ages. The Entertainment Software Association estimates that more than 150 million Americans play video games. So it's not surprising that psychologists have been able to document video game addiction. It turns out that the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders defined Internet gaming disorder as a condition for further study. It also said the disorder was most common among male adolescents, but we're seeing problems surfacing in every age group. Video games can be a safe way of improving hand-eye coordination, enhancing problem-solving abilities, and relieving stress. But the concerns about addiction and gaming disorder should concern youth and adults. Video games can be addicting and apparently take over the lives of many who find them too enticing to moderate. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on this January 8th, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts, and I am joined in studio by Beth Biesel, and then David Carruth as well, who are the leaders of the Park Cities Preston Hollow Leadership Forum. In the first segment, they were just telling us about their story, about how from an educational background and from a business background, really just seeing a need within the community and beginning to organize, to exercise their First Amendment right, to be able to assemble together, to be able to identify wrongs, and then hopefully to be able to correct right. And Beth, I'm really interested. So it really is. There's no 501c3 to it. It really is you all just kind of gathering together periodically to be able to educate whoever gathers on just the needs of the day. Right.
And some of the things that people are interested in, and these are, I'll talk about some of the educational components that we've had. First of all, coming up next, or tomorrow night, Tuesday night, we're having a candidate forum. So our people can come and meet the candidates. David Carruth will be the moderator, and he will ask questions of each of the candidates. So we've got state House district candidates, we've got judicial candidates, county candidates, sheriff, you name it. So that's one piece of education, is learning about who are the political officers or who are the candidates. We've also talked about the statue issue. You probably heard a lot about that. We had 2 city council people come and speak and present their view on what was taking place. And we talked about, here's what you can do to keep the statue, or most of us wanted to keep it. At the beginning of last year, we had Michael Quinn Sullivan come and talk about the legislative session and what were the legislative priorities. And depending upon where your interest is, you would get involved in one of those legislative issues. we've had someone come talk about voter fraud in Dallas County. That is a very, very big deal to protect the integrity of the vote. We hosted a very large meeting a couple years ago with Tom Coburn, former Senator Tom Coburn, and Mark Meckler on the Convention of States. As you know, that's been a very, very big, hotly debated question, and Texas did pass a resolution to support a Convention of States.
Wow.
We had almost 300 people at that meeting.
Wow.
So those are some of the kinds of meetings we've had and educational issues. David might have thought of some others,
and that's phenomenal. So it really is just kind of a gathering together to educate voters, really just within the spirit of what John Adams said, like an educated populace is just increasingly necessary for the flourishment of a democracy. Just educating candidates, and it's really fascinating because you're taking their questions. It's very much an open Q&A.
Yes, and the thing is, in the educational process, it's with the backdrop of the founding principles. It's not just these are what we think we ought to do, these ideas. It's not our ideas. There are eternal principles that work, that have been established, that are outside of our personal opinions. We don't get to decide. So when we bring in people to speak about an issue, it's always with the founding principles, the original principles, first principles, some people call them, that we compare, first of all, what's happening, what's going on, and how do they match up with these principles? Is there a gap? And in fact, our forum sticks to 5 essential principles that would characterize what we believe in and also influence the kind of speakers and education that we do.
That's phenomenal. And so we're going to get to those 5 principles because I'm really interested on kind of spelling out those 5 eternal principles, those values that you really hold dear, and what are the modern day manifestations? What are those things that are either trying to accentuate that or really going against that? We're going to be talking about that more and more as we get on later in the show, but also know that you can call in as well as voice your opinion or ask a question on Facebook. Facebook.com/pointofviewradio, Facebook.com/pointofviewradio, or you can call in 800-351-1212. Now, David, I want to put the question to you because I'm really interested. So you're going to have this candidate forum tomorrow. You're going to be the moderator, and it's an educational forum, but you're not going to endorse any candidates, or will you be endorsing candidates?
No, we have a policy of not endorsing candidates because we think it's up to the individual to decide who they want to vote for. We'll present the candidates, let them present their positions. Open the floor to Q&A, and then the attendees can make their own decisions. So we don't feel like it's necessary to endorse a candidate.
That's good. So again, and this is open to the public, correct, Beth?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so
yes.
Anyone can show up. There's no fee to join at all.
That's right.
You just kind of show
There's
up.
nothing to join. It's just it's just show up and be present.
The only limitation is the fire code.
Okay.
And the library won't let us have more than 120 people, and they do count. So you need to be there early, and the meeting starts at 6:15. Right. And so you need to be there. Yeah. And a funny thing, Russ Ramsland, the founder of the forum, came to a meeting a little bit late one time, and he got fire coded out. He couldn't even get into his own meeting.
That's not so. It really is. It's open to the public. So the idea of favoritism is not. It's just not a true and accurate. Because even the founder was even kicked out because he was over the fire code.
Right.
So it really is an open forum to educate the populace to better understand the issues of the day. Well, let's hone in on that. So you're speaking about the values and the principles that this gathering really holds dear. What are some of those? What are those?
At the beginning of each meeting, as Beth said, we do the pledges and we pray, and then we read these principles at every meeting, and I'll read them to you. There's 5 of them. Number 1 is spending money you don't have and have no hope of getting is a recipe for disaster. Thus, we believe in fiscal responsibility. Number 2 is more government, and squandering spending is rarely a solution to a problem. Thus, we believe in limited government. Number 3, each individual must take primary responsibility for his own well-being and that of his family. Thus, we believe in personal responsibility. Number 4, every judge and prosecutor has a duty to apply the law as it's written and not as he or she wishes it could be. Thus, we believe in the rule of law. Number 5 is the people of a nation should determine for themselves the laws which will govern their lives. Thus, we believe in national sovereignty. It's that simple. We're not a bunch of right-wing radicals This, in my opinion, is just good, solid common sense.
That's great. So again, those 5 principles for those that are listening is fiscal responsibility, limited government, personal responsibility, rule of law, and national sovereignty. Now, those are significant. Those are what we would consider timeless principles, I guess you could say. But you're putting a timestamp on them in 2018. So I'll be really interested to hear what are some of those modern day manifestations of some of those principles. What are threatening them, or what can be accentuated by them? And so let's just, and again, another clarification that I think is going to be important, that you all aren't just local Dallas. It's both Dallas, local, the city component. There's the state component, as well as the national component as well, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I think that's an important distinction to make as well. It's not simply just applying kind of what could be local guidelines into national issues. It really is understanding the distinctions to be made between the local and the federal as well. So let's just start it off right before we go to break. I'd be really interested to hear, what are physical responsibility? Are there issues today that are kind of that really are threatening physical responsibility, or we can be doing for that?
Well, let's talk about the debt. It's over $20 trillion.
I'm drowning right now.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
It's on my back, actually.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And we are also concerned about the state budget and how the state certifies the budget. It's not always as they say. So we're not just looking at the federal budget or the state budget. Also, you've got the city of Dallas, which is very close to fiscal insolvency. So there, the money talks, and it's screaming at us. We are spending irresponsibly with little or no accountability.
Wow. So is there particular action points or things that individuals can do, or legislation that's been put forward that really that can help kind of rein in some of the spending and just the overture of the debt?
Well, I don't know that there is specific legislation at this point, other than that the federal government is dealing with the budget right now, and it'd be interesting to see what they come back with. You never see in the federal budget a line item that addresses paying off the debt. They just roll it over forever. But that's I can't quote specific legislation unless you, Beth, have some ideas.
Well, what I would say as far as an action item is this: citizens need to call their congresswoman or man, congressman. They need to call their state representative or state senator. You need to call, because it's been said a congressman, if he or she gets 20 or 25 phone calls.
Right.
It's on his radar. He's doing something about it. That's a very low bar. For a state official, a senator or a representative, I don't know, 10 or 12, we just need to show up and call and say, we know what's going on and what you're doing is wrong, and you need to write legislation. You need to support legislation to stop spending irresponsibly.
Completely
That
agree.
making that phone call or showing up at their town halls, it's the most important thing to do, and it's easy.
Completely agree. From a personal standpoint, we know when physical irresponsibility can not only limit us, but can really be just a downfall of us. And so we're going to continue talking about physical responsibility as well as the other principles when we come back right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View, so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back on Point of View. I am Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio today by Beth Biesel as well as David Carruth, and we have been talking about the Park Cities Preston Hollow Leadership Forum. It's just an educational gathering whereby it's open to the public, an opportunity without charge for them to be able to hear discussion of issues, to be educated on issues, as well as hear the candidates. And we've been talking about they're organizing themselves around 5 principles. And for those of you that weren't tuning in, those 5 principles were fiscal responsibility, limited government, personal responsibility, rule of law, and national sovereignty. And when we got back, we were interrupted by one of those commercial breaks, but we were talking about the need for fiscal responsibility and how the greatest threat, potentially one of the greater threats to personal fiscal responsibility is just the debt and just this burden that's moving and putting on this coming generation, and the need, just like with any of us, if we have a significant debt, we need to take that into account with our spending into the future. Right, Beth?
Yes. You can't spend money you don't have. And, with this recent tax reform, so-called tax reform bill, they never talked about reducing the debt in that, did they, David?
You never see a line item in the federal budget about it. May be there, but I've never seen it about reducing the principal. It's always just paying the interest. And if you went to the bank and asked them for a loan, told them that you'd pay them the interest forever, but you weren't ever going to pay it back, they'd show you the door, and yet the taxpayers allow the federal government to do that. So,
and David, coming from a business background like you are, you know how debt can really hamstring you. It limits opportunities into the future.
Absolutely, and we're in a situation now. We have such a huge deficit, as Beth said, over $20 trillion. As the interest rates rise, and eventually they will, the debt burden, the interest burden only, is going to be staggering on this country, and I'm frankly not sure exactly how we're going to handle it. You've got to cut back all the other programs to be able to pay it, and at some point we could wind up where we're having to use virtually the whole budget just to service the debt, and that doesn't work. You can't continue in that direction. We've got to stop.
And so the call to action would be, like what we said before the break, is to be able to call your representatives, whether it's your, this is not only just a local level here in Dallas, but it's a state issue as well as a federal issue. So be calling your city councilmen, be calling your state representatives and your state senators, to be calling your elected officials to be able to press that.
And we need to know, how is the money being spent? Mm-hmm. We need to compare it to whether or not it's legitimately spent. Does the Constitution, for example, give the federal government constitutional authority, delegated authority, to actually spend money on something? For example, education. The federal government never should be in the education business. So we need to look at how the money is spent at all levels of government and decide or determine if it's legitimate. And if it's not, we need to stop. And there's games that these elected officials play with the numbers. We need to understand that. But mostly, if you don't want to get into the weeds, you just need to know we're spending way more than we're taking in, and you can't keep taxing individuals more and more and more. So just call your elected officials and tell them you want to see legislation, you want to see at city level, state level, federal level, you want to see something changed. And sit down with that elected official and ask, how can we do this?
That's phenomenal, which leads us into the second particular component of the leadership forum, which is limited government. Now, limited government has been kind of one of those talking points, right? It's often said, but let's put a modern day manifestation to that. What are some of those issues where the limited government perspective, is the government continuing to encroach in, like you were saying, Beth? Is the government encroaching in on our everyday life?
Well, like I just said, the education, the federal government should not be involved in education at all. And then with all the rules and regulations that come from the bureaucracies that are unelected, by the way, all these rules and regulations that are so burdensome to us, they cost money. And these rules and regulations are telling us how much water we can flush in our toilet, what kind of light bulbs we can use, what kind of grass we can grow, whether or not I can put rocks or cement in my backyard.
One of my favorite points on that is that, did you know that here in Texas, a person that's going to cut hair, in order to get a license to cut hair, they have to log 2,000 hours in order to be able to get a license to cut hair. Now, call me crazy, but if you want to cut hair, let the market determine whether you're good or not, or whether you need the license.
Right.
I don't think we're going to have any Sweeney Todds out there, but let the government, let the market determine whether you're a good barber, not necessarily the government for the license.
And that's another good point. There are so many things now that are government driven rather than free market driven.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the whole smart meter deployment.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a free market driven solution. That was top down, government driven. And I would even suggest that it actually really came from the United Nations. If you do your history, study your history and look at where it actually came from, but that we need to let free market solutions drive what we do and don't do. And that's an easy comparison. Either it's free market, bottom up, or top down. And if it's top down, and if it's not listed in for example, the 20 powers that Congress has in the Constitution, I'm talking federal level right now, if it's not listed there, then the federal government has no business. Healthcare. Federal government has no business in the healthcare business of my healthcare or managing healthcare. So that's a huge expenditure. That's a big budget item.
The good news is that the current administration, the Trump administration, is I think the number is, for every new regulation, they're eliminating 16 existing regulations, and that's the direction we need to go in, for the very reason Beth said.
And it really is. There's a limited government perspective, and so if we're looking at it from a Democratic side, when they hear limited government, it's not caring for individuals. You're wanting to say that we don't care for them. But from the conservative side, it's not necessarily not caring for them. It's recognizing that there's opportunities that are abounding in the local communities for individuals as well as local entities that aren't government regulated to be able to care for them, right?
Also, you can't care for these needy people with a $20 trillion debt burden. They and
definitely
all
can't
of
care
us,
for their children that way,
and that you can't care for their children. It's a recipe for disaster, really.
Which transitions us into the third principle. So if the first principle was physical responsibility, second, limited government, the third would be personal responsibility. Are we seeing, what are some of those threats? What's being illuminated in 2018 relative to personal responsibility? Is there something that percolates at the top of the mind? Like, I'm thinking to my own self, there's a couple of issues.
Well, go ahead and tell me
when
one.
I think about personal responsibility, I think we're living and moving increasingly in a world in which it seems as though we're fighting for our rights, but not necessarily what is our duty to our country. We're seeing the decrease in, especially what you all are doing, which is exemplifying it. Meeting above, this isn't your full-time job. You're not making a paycheck off the leadership forum, but you're seeing your duty to your country to educate the citizens necessary to make educated decisions in the polling place.
Right.
What is our duty to our country? What are those sacrifices that we need to make that previous generations have made in order to be able to see a better future?
Well, part of it is just what you said, and that's to educate yourself and become knowledgeable in the issues so that you can participate in the system. Yeah. If you're not participating in the system, you're sitting on the sidelines and you're not contributing. And as far as personal responsibility goes, we need less government support and more personal support. If a person will get involved and will track personal responsibility instead of calling for the government every time they have a problem or an issue, we might balance the budget at some point, because we've got to get away from all the so-called entitlement programs at some point, because we can't afford them. We're out of money.
And personal responsibility, I think it can mean a couple of things, but even the responsibility to take care of my own health, to make good choices for my health. You know, there are some companies out there now that are not medical insurance companies. They're medical sharing companies, but they're if you're part of one, and I am, you're in a lower risk pool because you have committed to taking care of yourself, to making good health decisions. But I also think of personal responsibility as good stewardship. So I don't need the government to tell me what kind of light bulbs or how much water to flush in my toilet or when to water my lawn. When the government intervenes in that, I think it breaks that responsibility to stewardship. So you're dependent on the government. You're looking to the government. I don't need the government to tell me to put on a seatbelt or to not smoke a lot of pot, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When the government starts doing that, then we shirk our own responsibility to make wise choices and to help
our neighbor.
Help our neighbor.
Yeah.
Government intervention breaks that social bond so much so that we say, well, the government will take care of that beggar on the street.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take care of that person.
I think one of the beautiful examples, especially here in Texas, was from Hurricane Harvey. Just this sheer amount of individuals that came and helped out their fellow neighbor. Again, it's a beautiful opportunity. And we're going to talk more about this because there's so much to talk about after the break.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Ben Franklin reportedly said, "There is nothing certain in life except for death and taxes." Well, in a 548-page complaint, one man has targeted at least one of those certainties, and it's not death. Terry Lee Hines contends that the United States tax code has violated the Constitution by establishing taxism and institutionalized faith and religion. Because the tax code has the effect of favoring and even promoting organized religions through tax breaks and other benefits, Mr. Hines believes the tax code is in violation of the First Amendment. Well, I suppose this is the sort of case that law students are forced to grapple with, but actually have little effect in the real world. Some may dream that such a lawsuit is the silver bullet to bring down our ghoulish tax system. Alas, Mr. Hines' lawsuit will not free us from the taxman's visit every April 15. For one reason, taxpayers have a lot of hurdles to overcome just to bring the lawsuit. Mere allegations, even ones dressed up in the garb of a First Amendment challenge, that they do not like to pay taxes will not be sufficient. For now, Mr. Hines and the rest of us will have to continue to pay our taxes, and most importantly, the religious charities and houses of worship that are exempt from them will continue to be exempt. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the roundtable today by Beth Biesel, as well as David Carruth of the Park Cities Preston Hollow Leadership Forum. And we've been talking about their 5 organizing principles that they have, and the 5 organizing principles we've been gone over so far is fiscal responsibility, limited government, personal responsibility, and the last 2 we're going to continue to try to tease out a little bit more is the rule of law as well as national sovereignty. So, Beth, we were talking about over the break, rule of law. Help us to be able to understand what you mean by the rule of law.
Well, when we talk about the rule of law, we literally mean judges and prosecutors do not get to make it up just because it feels good or they think it's a good idea. We believe that ideas don't come from within. There are guiding principles that are outside of ourselves. And in our case, in the federal government, we have the United States Constitution. And so the laws that are made need to comport with the Constitution. I might also add that we believe that laws must comport with God's law and natural law, but you don't get to just make it up. And as some have said, that which is legal, a legal statute, is not always legitimate. That was Frederick Bastiat in his book, The Law. Or sometimes those things that are legal are sometimes evil. So we need to look at our laws. We need to know what they are. And if you come to the forum, we will talk about some of the statutes that have been passed and whether or not they are legal or legitimate or evil, or maybe some are good. But if they're not good, then we look at, we'll ask, what can we do?
Yeah.
Back to what can we do? The most important thing is show up, learn about the issue, and then call your legislator, call your representative.
Yeah, I think about it. Oh, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, or get involved to the point of running for office. I mean, we need good candidates in at all levels, from the federal government down to the judges. And in that regard, let me point out something that's a little bit off topic, but when people go to vote the entire ballot. Don't just vote the people you know about. I used to be brilliant and think, well, I'll just vote for the people I know something about, and I won't vote for those people that I don't know anything about. Well, that was just a vote for the other party. That just gave the other party a vote. Vote all the way down to ballot, and if you identify with one party or another, trust their judgment and vote all the way to the bottom. Otherwise, you're giving a vote to the other party.
And I have something else, and again, it's a little bit of a sidebar here in regard to rule of law, but it does come to my mind, and I think it's important. We have the rule of law for a purpose, and that's for our legislators, our elected officials to follow. But as is in the case of the federal government and somewhat state government, we've got a whole bureaucracy of a governing class that is not required to follow the rule of law. They're not held accountable. There's no written laws that tell them what they can do and can't do. And in fact, they just make up stuff. So Congress will pass a statute, and then we've got this governing class of bureaucracy that decides how it's going to be implemented. And they have authority at some level. I don't know what you call it, but they make up rules and regulations about how it's applied. And then we're held to it. And there's a disconnect there, and that governing class needs to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the extent. I kind of love, I always think about what George Washington said in his farewell address. He quoted one of the Psalms, and he says, "Now is the time for me to go and sit underneath the trees that I have planted." It's the extent that I've built these things, and now I need to experience these things so that if there ever comes a time, which not for Washington, there ever came a time, if there ever comes a time to run again or to take elected office again, I can better understand how to recreate or to modify the system in order that it might be for the betterment of the country. I think it was a really important point that you made, Beth, of just because we have the right to do it doesn't necessarily mean it's good to do it. I mean, we know that from the biblical principles, right?
Exactly.
Even what Paul said to the church at Corinth, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. It's permissible for me if I had a particular license and the proper paperwork to be able to carry a gun, but is it beneficial for me to carry a gun everywhere? Which is an important point to make. It's within my right to be able to drink. I'm over 21, and if I'm in the legal confines, but it's not necessarily beneficial for me to drink myself into oblivion, because then I'm going to wake up and feel atrocious, right? So there's distinctions to be made between, just because we have the right to do something doesn't necessarily mean to take it to the fullest extent that it's beneficial. And David, I think from your point, especially from a business perspective, the rule of law provides stability, and it's that stability that allows the businessman to be able to calculate the necessary risk, right?
It does, but you have to be able to count on the rule of law being adhered to, and that's
So
the problem. And we see so many instances. A good example is sanctuary cities. I mean, the law is fairly clear, and yet you've got government officials just saying to the federal government, "We're not going to obey the law." If I did that, they'd put me under the jail. But governors and mayors are saying it every day, and police chiefs are saying it every day to the federal government, we're just not going to obey the law.
Yeah.
That's got to change.
Yeah, it reminds me of a Flannery O'Connor, who is just an early 20th century writer, Catholic writer. She says, "The truth doesn't change according to my ability to stomach it."
That's right. That's right.
So,
and if you want it to be different, change the law. Don't challenge the law. Change it.
And we also think it's important that our elected officials also abide by the very same laws that they make us abide by. And some of our elected officials would argue with that, or either they will tell us that, oh, they do abide by every law. But we don't think that's the case.
Okay. So we're almost running out of time, but I want to tease out this last characteristic that we have, national sovereignty. Help us tease that out a little bit. Elaborate for us. What is national sovereignty? Is it really just obeying kind of the rules and the laws of the land and our borders?
Well, it's also our national laws. We do not believe that it is appropriate to put ourselves under international law, the United Nations, the EU, or Sharia law. It has no place in this country. We have a United States Constitution. We have a Texas state constitution. We need our own sovereignty, and a national sovereignty is the federal government.
And we're a republic. The people need to rule, and we don't see that happening all the time. I mean, the people's will is not always respected by our elected officials, and it needs to be.
We are a government for the people and by the people.
Correct.
And so, okay, we're coming to a close. So tell us how can we get more information, or there's a meeting that's coming up tomorrow, right? Tell our listeners a little bit about that.
We have a candidate forum tomorrow night, January the 9th, Tuesday, starting at 6:15 at the University Park Library. We'll probably close about 8:30. These are GOP primary candidates. And again, as David said, we don't endorse, we just bring people there. David's the moderator.
Correct. And there'll be a Q&A so that the people that attend can ask questions of the candidates, and they'll get to outline their positions very briefly, because we've been overwhelmed with people wanting to attend and candidates that want to attend. But we're trying to limit it, and we'll probably have another forum before probably in the next couple of weeks, because the election's coming up.
We're going to have another meeting January 31st. We usually don't have 2 meetings in 1 month, but this was a unique situation where Alan West, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, is going to speak. And we never know what he's going to say, but we know it's going to be
it's
awesome.
Always good.
It's always good. It's always motivating, and he will have marching orders. You know, a soldier needs to have his orders.
That's
and
phenomenal.
Lieutenant Colonel will give us our marching orders. I'm targeting February 13th for the next meeting and the next candidate forum. We have so many candidates, we're going to have to divide them up into 2 different meetings.
That's phenomenal. Well, Beth and David, thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in later on today for Point of View with Kirby Anderson. See you.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800